You must not lose faith in humanity. Humanity is like an ocean. If a few drops of the ocean are dirty, the ocean does not become dirty. Mahatma Gandhi.
Bending, Not Breaking. Season 4, Episode 12. Endgame.
Hey everyone, before we get started with our episode today, I want to provide you with a content warning. This episode, we will be discussing suicide, we'll be discussing abuse, we will be discussing a lot of things that are really not necessarily something you might want to be engaging with. So if you're not in the right headspace, and if you want to avoid that kind of a conversation, don't worry, you will see us next time with our next episode. But for this episode, you might just want to skip it till the next time. Just know that we will be involved in some tough conversation. And if you're going to listen, thank you. And if not, no worries. We're glad that you're a part of this community. Thanks for listening.
Welcome back to another episode of Bending Not Breaking. I'm Sunshine.
And this is Ben.
And we are at the season finale of
Season
Book
1. Oh, I guess book is better.
Book 1, Legend of Korra. So many things are happening. It's an incredible episode. And for an incredible episode, we needed to bring back an incredible guest.
That's right.
That's right. Ben, who do we have with us?
Back by popular demand.
So much demand.
Everyone. We have back with us Indhira Udofia, and rather than me butchering her in wonderful credentials, I want to just, Indhira, welcome you to tell us all about you and who you are and what you're all about.
Hi everyone, and you flatter. I'm sure I am not the most requested, but my name is Indhira.
So much good feedback. Everyone loved your episode on the Firebending Masters. And so, one, if you haven't listened to that episode and you're listening to this, go back and listen to that episode because it's incredible. Not because Ben and I do anything special. It's all Indhira. And so we are so excited to have you back. But yeah, you were amazing. And we're just, for what an incredible episode, we want you back and we're glad you're here.
Yes, I'm glad to be invited back. So as discussed, my name is Indhira Udofia. I have a lot of degrees because I have a lot of student debt. I'm a therapist. I am a spiritual coach and counselor. I am a new cat mama. And currently am a PhD student at UNCG and A&T in the social work department. And I am a nerd and I love cartoons. And so I'm just really grateful to come back and to talk about my queen, the love of my life, Korra.
There are not enough people out there that love Korra, and I'm glad we are like cultivating that community and being.
Listen, this is a Korra Stan account. I do not take Korra slander very well. I think people really need to check their patriarchy.
Yeah, 100%. Like, it's unreal. It's unreal. Like the fan base. Like I wonder. Like I don't have a good.
It's strange. It's not strange because it's something.
It's very predictable.
It's very predictable.
Yeah.
There are always valid critiques of media. There are always valid critiques of shows, of characters, of writing. They're out there. And Korra has those. There are valid reasons to like push back on certain elements of the show. However, I feel like the only ones I hear are deeply rooted in misogyny.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And whether it's coded or blatant, like that's always something that's there. And so, like, I'm down to hear some critiques around Korra that are, like, valid critiques.
Because, I mean, there are some.
I haven't heard them yet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, and it discredits, it's tough because I think it discredits the real critiques when all you hear, it's the same thing with, like, Rey in Star Wars or Katara, even when we're talking Avatar: The Last Airbender, like, ones that are just so deeply rooted in this unrealistic expectations of the way that we hold female characters to a higher standard than their male counterparts. And so, like, it's very frustrating because when there are valid critiques, it's shrouded by a very loud, I would hope is the minority of fans in the fandom, but a very loud group of people in regards to their dislike. And it's not that you dislike something, it's how you dislike something is really what it like that's where I have issues.
Absolutely.
Totally fair.
But let's stop focusing on the negative and let's dive into
this episode
the meat of this episode.
This episode is like so chock full of there's so much that goes down. Oh, it's so good. I'm really excited to dive
not
in.
enough time to dig in, but we're going to do our best. And our lens is humanity.
Yeah. So, Indira, you kind of we had a conversation about this, and I want you to kind of help our listeners. How did we arrive at this lens? What was it that kind of guided us and guided you specifically towards choosing humanity as the lens? Because there were other ones we were kind of tossing up, but we arrived on this one. What led to that?
So, one of the things is that like you all have said, it is so rich, and there's so much stuff around Anand's story, and just even Korra being faced with her own limitations. You have like people navigating grief. And I think at the end of the episode, it's just a beautiful lesson and story about how our humanity not only makes us vulnerable, but actually is the source of our strength, right? So we have so much of how fear and trying to erase or remove our humanity in order to be the best, or to avenge, or to right wrongs, and to become something beyond the tender parts, that we forget that it's really our humanity that drives our fears, our desires, our strengths, our concerns. And so I just thought that humanity was broad enough to talk about all of the ways in which vulnerability and purpose and history and connection and disconnection all happened within this episode.
I think our problem is that we're going to be wanting to hit so many different aspects and so many different things. So I'm because there's so many different things, even just from listening to you say that. I'm like, ooh, I want to talk about all these things, and now I'm nervous because I don't think we're going to get to them all. But we're going to do our best. In order to do that, though, we need to remind our listeners who maybe didn't watch this episode recently, we need to make sure that Sunshine gives them a nice full 30-second recap. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pull 30 seconds. We're going to put it on the clock, and we're going to make sure that he is super just informative.
I'm cracking my neck in preparation. Gotta make sure the diaphragm is ready. And
are you ready?
I'm gonna say this is my favorite part of the podcast. I'm not gonna hold it.
That's good, because we are terrible at it. All right,
let's see what happens.
All right, on your mark.
Okay.
Get set. Go.
An electric fence knocks out our heroes as they try to sabotage the airfield. Amon gets revealed on what's behind the mask, but then lifts up Tenzin, and the Airbender family has potential threats, and he's going to try to take them out. Korra then jumps in, even though he's baiting her, and sets them free. Massive fights ensue between General Iroh, Korra, Amon. All the bloodbending takes place, but then, even though her powers have been taken from her, we see that she's an Airbender, and Amon is wearing a lot of makeup. And then that's it. That's pretty much it. And then a boat blows up.
I think you did great.
I think you did
you for your effort.
fantastic.
It's lucky, again, the episodes where there's a lot of fight scenes, real easy to recap. And there's a fight, and things happen. Like, I can't go blow by blow. Like, I can't say, like, there was a... So it helps when I just get to say fight scene.
Yeah. I mean, Indira, I'm going to throw down the gauntlet. Do you think you can do better?
Absolutely not.
Do you want to try?
Absolutely not. I'm not gonna embarrass myself in front of all these beautiful people. Not with my grad school brain.
We're going to give you the opportunity, but we're going to give you the opportunity to pass as well. So no worries. If I could pass, I would pass it on to Sunshine every time.
I mean,
but alas.
you do such a great job. You really do.
Well, Stop it. Stop
It's,
it.
it's we just there's so much to cover. So
Yes.
let's jump into it.
Yeah.
Moments of humanity in this episode.
Yeah. Indira, we're tossing it straight to you.
That's
Like,
right.
what's the point? What's
Okay.
the moment you want to lift up first?
So, can I just go ahead and let's just talk about the arc of Korra in this episode? I think will be a really good way to start, and then we'll kind of move
Okay.
to Anon and Anon's brother. So the one thing that I realized is that Korra's uh, what's the word I want to use? Korra's ravenous acceptance of her avatar identity is so important to how she walks and moves through the world like a bull in a china shop. And I love that about her. I love that being the avatar somehow elevates or heightens her sense of fearlessness, her grit, and the glory. Like she's a warrior. But one of the things that happens, and it's throughout the entire book one, but especially on this episode, is that when she is faced with what she cannot be, when her quote unquote weaknesses are highlighted or amplified, you for she for not only you forget, but she forgets that it's okay to kind of like learn and morph into something, which is a very human trait. And so we see her in this episode, charging into a fight with a lot of fear, but not really honoring that what that fear means. And then having this big giant confrontation with Anon. And then as she realizes that he is not only a bender, but a blood bender and has this ability to take away power. You can see there's like a moment where you literally see her humanity step up in a way that like it's just nothing but unadulterated purity fear. And I think
Yeah.
these moments of fear have to remind Korra that she is becoming her full self as the avatar, that she hasn't fully arrived at it yet. And I think that kind of willingness to kind of to not willingness, but the kind of forced reality of the fact that we don't have it all together is something that is so human, because we always want to be our purpose, be our thing, walk into who exactly we're becoming. And we never realize that there's a lot of failures and trials and errors that are required for us to be our full selves. It is literally
Yeah.
that journey of becoming that makes us human. And I think Korra has to be reminded that just because she has these abilities does not negate her humanity.
Yeah, one of the memes that pops up around Avatar lore in general is that
Mm-hmm.
Aang was learning to be a superhero, and then Korra is learning to be human.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like kind of like showing the difference between the two. And like Aang was always humble and always kind of very modest, whereas Korra is the opposite, right? She is so well developed in her bending of the first three elements that she mastered that like they came so easy to her. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting to watch this process of her becoming more fully human through exactly what you're describing, by through her failures, through
Mm-hmm.
her realizing that she's not perfect, that she's not a fully realized superhero yet. And I think that that lesson in humility is a pretty big component to what humanity looks like for us.
Well, I find that there are so many moments in humanity can easily come from these moments of failure because that
Mm-hmm.
allows us to connect. It allows us to share like pain and an understanding of pain or loss or shame or grief or these things that we typically feel when we fail at something. and that allows us to connect with other people when they also feel those things, and allows us to understand and allows for those more human moments of compassion. Um, and so these moments of quote unquote failure that Korra goes through over the course of this season are some of the moments that hit the hardest for me because like I feel them. Like I physically
Mm-hmm.
feel those
Yes.
moments when she goes through them because I've gone through those moments before. And like I've never lost my bending ability, right? Like and but this idea of um fear, being scared that you're not good enough, being scared that people are going to be hurt because of something that you did or didn't do. Like those are very real feelings, and so the humanity that comes from those failures from her are the ones that hit the hardest for me over the course of this episode. And I
And
think
I,
that that's
oh, go ahead.
similar to how we process the real world.
Yeah. And I want to also highlight that there is a privilege, right, for masculine, male identified folks, right, to be able to kind of, stumble through, right? But there's an added pressure of being female or femme identified where you're not there's so much pressure because there's already questions about you being in the room to begin with, right? And there seems to be there was well when you think about it, there seems to always be this goading about whether or not Korra is going to be the real thing, right? Is Korra going to fall into the legacy of Kyoshi, right? Like, so we have to constantly think about how there's this added pressure because she is a woman or identifies as a femme presenting person, right? How that also adds extra pressure because you have to be extra confident because you're already invalidated as soon as you get into the room. And another thing is she's still a teenager, right? Which has all types of implications about just trying to chart out on your own, trying to create your own identity. You've been sequestered for, ever since you were a toddler, basically. And so many people have expectations about who you're supposed to be. And here you are, you have to kind of make good on all these investments, as well as the things that you have said and boasted about yourself. And I think,
Mm.
like, thinking about that pressure, right? And thinking about how humanity is deeply layered and textured, and how expectations impact our ability to walk in our humanity or reject our humanity ties Korra and Anon in this really weird way, because both of them have to make good on an investment. Anon with his father, and Korra with this community that has tried to train and push her to be Avatar.
And it's interesting because we see Korra from the ample amount of males in this show, right? Consistently get questioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
It all the way back in episode 2 when Korra meets Mako and Bolin, Mako's like judges her immediately just because she shows up and assumes that she's one of Bolin's, just like flattering over Bolin, and then he realizes, and he says after he realizes that she's the Avatar, he's like, and I'm an idiot, right? And it's one of
Mm-hmm.
those things that's just like it's consistent. Like she is constantly both underestimated, and because she is the Avatar, like at the same time overestimated in a way. It's just the added pressure of all of these dynamics is this is what being human means, right? Even when
Mm-hmm.
we have avatar like qualities, even when like the people with special abilities in this world, like in our world in reality, are around, they are still human, right? We are all human, and it's this grappling with and noticing these different layers that makes us all trying to grapple with things that are really difficult to see without the ability to see it from another's perspective. And so I
Absolutely.
think my question for that is, when like empathy is clearly a really important component to being able to develop an understanding of the shared humanity between us, right? Can you
Mm-hmm.
like can you point to that anywhere in this, or is there a moment that you kind of think of when I say that, or does that make sense? Is that resonating at all, or is that just completely
Yeah.
off base?
No, it's I hate to say it, it's in the boat scene, right? Of this like shared empathy that okay, and you have to remind me of the councilman's name because I always forget.
Yeah, that's
I
it's Tarlock and then Noah Talk.
Yes. So when Tarlock is talking about Noah Talk and they're talking about going home and like and you have this moment, right, where Tarlock sees how there is really truly no way to redeem because because his father has rendered his brother a monster. And as much as he would love to offer the grace of humanity and lived out, he knows what he has to do. And there's an empathy in being able to make that sacrifice and realize we would be better off. And I know that sounds really strange for a therapist to say, right, that murder suicide is a form of shared empathy, but that was one of the major scenes. And I think also, if we think about how Korra's community rallies behind her at the loss of the other three elements, um, and shows like, tries to offer comfort and distance in the midst of the grieving before she goes into spirit mode, right? And I
Yeah.
think that there's some type of tenderness that is held in both of those scenes, right? Um, and I want to say that, like, I think when we think about our own journeys and about loss, right, and thinking about how our stories don't always have happy endings, right, there's a certain level of tenderness and connection that happens among people who can identify with that. um, that really knits and shows and fortifies relationships in a way that just sharing victories don't. I find, like, in my own journey, the more that I have lost and met with people um, who have also suffered similar losses, the more that I can understand how that shows up and what that tenderness feels like and what that pain feels like, and it makes me lean in more to figure out a way to connect and to bear witness and to be with. Um, if if I didn't have that knowledge before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's just there's a lot in this episode that, and especially with these 2 points, I think it's really important to highlight what you're saying, and I wonder, and tell me your response to this, either of you. For me, like I see you're kind of lifting up this empathy that Tarlock is kind of experiencing. For me, what I see in a way is you mentioned the word like Noah Talk has become this monster, right? And in a way that is is seeing a loss in the humanity that he once had, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that like pointed out to me is when he says like Noatak, like I barely remember that name. I wonder if to do the things that he's had to
He had
do,
to
if he's had to
disassociate.
dissociate the humanity himself, right? Had to really lean into this idea of being a monster. Had to create this alter
Get it?
ego.
A monster.
Right. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he had to do this so because when it feels like it starts to eat it himself. So you have to disassociate. You have to kind of put yourself in a different headspace to be able to do the things that he's done. And it goes to the way that even the way that we as people have to dehumanize others. And if we are intending to cause harm over time, which hopefully
Mm-hmm.
we're not, but we see
Yeah.
that that's a thing that happens. Right, that's the base level of mass genocide, or is the starting of the dehumanizing process. Like, what are the names we can use? What are the ways that we can take the humanity away from people, and it almost feels like Amon had to do that to himself to be able to do those things as well.
Absolutely,
Um,
because oh, go ahead.
no, go jump in, yeah,
No,
please.
because at the core of all of this, it's survival, right? Like underneath the thumb of abuse. And this is not to say that if you suffer from childhood abuse, that you're inherently a monster. I'm not saying that at all. But what I do think is that in order to contort to the vision that um, Tarlok and Tarlok's father wanted, he had to detach. And you see this dissociation happen at the Battle of the Brothers, as I called it, right? You saw it already
Yeah.
happening. And being able to say, and he never looked back, like he left home and never looked back. And this idea of when you can fully devoid yourself of home, of loyalty, of self, and to be able to put on this disguise, because you could have clearly done this whole situation showing your face. It did not require the face paint, but you chose to do that to be able to detach yourself, not only from any type of ties or family, but to detach yourself from yourself. And the fear that happened when he was found out to be a bender, right? Of the removal of the mask, you could tell that he also still couldn't connect to who he actually was in that moment.
Well, in a way, he still had a mask on, right, with the
Mm-hmm.
painted scar, and like it's interesting to me to see, to be able to, the first time you see his facial expressions is when you really see like there's just there is so much emotion in his response to Korra and being called out and being named for who he is, that it just, whoa, there's so much there.
But it feels like he's lying to himself in those moments. It's feeling like that's calling him out. Like it becomes like, all right, I am the monster that I've was thought to be, because she's calling out and lifting up these lies that I'm like, it's calling me out, and kind of it's revealing who I am. It's lifting the mask. It's peeling back the veil. And so I wonder if that's like, it starts to dig in like that. Did shame hit the first time? Was that the first time shame had hit for him in a while, or guilt around any of the stuff that he's done? Side note, and this is not meant to be, did he have to do the makeup every day? Just because, like, just in case the mask came off? Like,
I,
just in case it fell off, like, I have to have this thing here. I wonder if that was an everyday thing for Amon.
I would think
Just,
so.
that was, yeah. That's, I mean, dedication, but that's a lot of time, right? That was really the scarring makeup. That wasn't just a 30-second thing. Um,
Mm-mm. It's
Now
an
to jump back into
armor.
the serious conversation, but it's the armor. Um, but that's I. It's one of those things of I don't even know where the point I was going with this, but I just feel like that was a moment for him where was he revealed and kind of get his like look in the mirror moment, when she called him out for those, and then have to like quickly recover and try to. The Avatar is lying. She's grasping at straws and all that stuff. So, but
Yeah.
Oof.
oof. A moment that I want to lift up is this moment at the end where everyone is back at the South Pole.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they are, right, at this point. The South Pole, and just sitting in the room waiting for Katara's like evaluation
Is
felt
her healing gonna work or
felt
no?
so much like a hospital waiting room to me, which is a
Mm-hmm.
weird thing. Like, I feel like everything gets stripped away in a hospital waiting room. Like everything that it's just there's so much fear and grief, and it is shared almost among everybody who is in that space. Um, and but to see everyone there that cares, every support system that Korra has there, is not something we all get in the moments that Korra's going through, and
Mm-hmm.
that like it actually brought tears to my eyes watching it because of the amount of support and love she has from everyone that she cares about that is in that space, um, and just thinking about how that is not something that everyone has when they're going through those moments, but the power of when it is there, when true support is there from loved ones,
Well, and
what
what's
that
hard
can
about
do.
that is that she's not able to accept it either because
Mm-hmm.
she has lost her bending. She feels that she is not worthy
We accept
of
the
that
love we think
love,
we
right?
deserve.
Which is exactly right. The Chbosky quote, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like when when that happens, we start telling ourselves this story that we are unlovable, that we are not worthy. We are like that is very human, right? To
Mm-hmm.
me, that is one of the devastating qualities of being human is that sometimes we feel unlovable and we feel like we're no longer worthy. And it's in these moments that having those people in that waiting room matter the most, right? That's when
Mm-hmm.
it really matters. And it's just I agree, it's just a really touching moment to see some people that you wouldn't expect to be waiting on Korra in this moment, right?
Right.
I don't know that Lynn was I don't sense that amount of affection from her, but she was present, right? There's just clearly the course of this season developed a relationship, then developed some
Mm-hmm.
compassion there, and I just think it's really beautiful.
Yeah. And I think what also is at the cores, right, is if I lose the thing that I do, will community still love me? Or do they only love me for what I do versus who I am? And I think that kind of anxiety that is centered around function over friendship and like whether or not I'm worthy of having community if I cannot perform the task that is avatar, or the task that is, pro bending athlete, I think is a real strong impulse because we often have to ask ourselves, if I can't work myself into worthiness, am I still worth the love and care of community? That's a very human question to ask. And we often
Oh, and
hide
it's
it behind,
so sorry,
no, go
finish.
ahead. I was just saying, we often hide behind our identities about what we do and our professions, and we don't actually think about, or we don't actually lean into the fact that people love us for who we are, not what we do.
Yeah, and this is just so prevalent in developing minds as well. Working with
Mm-hmm.
children, working with teenagers, this is so prescient and present in that developing formative place because what happens is we live in a world, unfortunately, that values achievement, right? And so you're only lovable when you get an A on your report card. You're only lovable when you get first in your track meet. You're only lovable when you're the best at your sport.
I never got first in a track meet.
But but there are some families that the the culture of the family prizes achievement
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
over everything else. And what that does in the formation of a young person is it makes them feel as though their belonging and their love is contingent upon achievement. And so
Mm-hmm.
we learn this. And so I wonder for the avatar, right? I wonder what it's like to have everything be depending on how you're raised.
Mm-hmm.
You are praised for your achievements. You're like I wonder how much praise she got for being non-avatar related qualities.
Well, and I think that's what I want to highlight is like, what are we celebrating? Because like
Yes.
what we do does matter, right? Like our
Mm-hmm.
value, our intrinsic value isn't like we are worthy of love regardless. But
Mm-hmm.
we also have a responsibility to show other people that, to lift up other people, to make sure that we're pushing back on systems that show people they're not valued. Like we have a responsibility to do something, but we are worthy of love if like regardless, and we need to act. So what are we celebrating in those moments, right? Is it the you got an A? Is it the you're the best? Is it the you won? Or is it the you're pushing forward, you're trying, you're supporting other people? Like what are we celebrating? I think is kind of partners with that.
Yeah. That's really
And we've
beautiful.
And we see that, right? So there's this tension that happens all of book one. And I know that like we're focusing on this episode, but I think it's important to talk about, since it is a season finale of book one, I think it's to talk about the course of it, right? We see this worthiness wound being exercised and irritated throughout the whole thing with, are you going to help with the fight? Are you just going to sit on your laurels? Are you going to go and charge into battle? Or are you only here to receive? Like this constant push and pull about what Korra's purpose is for being in the city, right? And like whether or not her invitation is contingent on the things that she can do for the city, rather than just having an open hand hospitality and just being guests of the air temple, right? And I think even the friendships that she's cultivated have been based off of the things that she can do. They grew to enjoy who she was, but it was all contingent about what you do. And I know that for folks who are like myself, who are very, very, very much tied to like work-based relationships, is very, very hard to disentangle. If I can't perform in a certain way, does that make me worthy of things, or does that make me open to, can I sustain things if I can no longer do things? And I have to constantly work at the fact that what I do for people does not equate to why I'm lovable. And I think Korra is faced with the decision that if I cannot do the things that a traditional avatar is supposed to do, which is have mastery of the four elements, will that make me me? Does that mean that everything that I am is now stripped away and nothing works because I'm just now an airbender?
Yeah. So I have a question for you, and this is a theory that I think I share with some of the fandom, but I'm not committed to it, but I do think I am on the side of, I think this is my thought as well.
Okay.
So we see the murder suicide between Noatak and Tarlok, and to me that was almost a foreshadowing to this moment with Korra at the end, where Korra is now at her lowest point, if you will. And we see her at the edge of a cliff. We see the tear fall off her face and fall down. And to me, it just alluded to the possibility that she was in a space as well that had like suicidal ideation in this moment where she was at her worst. Is it worth going on? Am I worth it? And I think my answer is that yes, that this is a moment where this is something that she considered. It may not have been something that she ultimately followed through with, but I I have a strong feeling that this is something that went through her mind, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this moment.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if that's the route that she was thinking through, simply because of the how intrinsic is her life purpose was wrapped up in her abilities. And so
Yeah.
I personally would have thought of, I mean, obviously we know it's a kids show. They probably would. I mean, I was shocked about the boat scene, to be quite honest, but um I do see how fandom could consider about suicidal ideation. And I think it's really interesting how mental health is a constant thread throughout this whole series, let alone this whole.
Absolutely.
And, you know, Korra definitely has, battles with, I can see traits of depression and anxiety. And I could see how losing the one thing that keeps you would be earth shattering. And I think that's a powerful connection to make, because it's very, very accurate. I don't believe that she would have not done that. Like, I don't think she just went on the
Yeah.
cliff just to think about her life.
And in a way, that what that to me really lifts up Mako's actions as incredibly important, both
Hmm.
leading up to her walking away and also her when she sees him after he's like come to find her after she ran away, right? It's this
Hmm.
moment where, yes, he confesses his love for her, which, may or may not have could have been in a different time,
Yeah.
but the first thing that he says is,
I dislike that moment, like the like, hey, I'm gonna kind of make this about me right now and tell you how much I love you, and like
it's complicated.
I struggle with that,
Yeah.
and yet it's very real. I
But
feel like people do that
that's
like all the
so
time
real,
as like
right?
a
Talk about being
saving
human,
throw,
right?
right?
Like I'm gonna
But
do something really, really, really great and taint it just a little bit, right?
it's not the time.
Yeah.
Like, read the room, Mako.
But that's kind of my point, though, is that right before that, right before his confession, right, is
Hmm.
I'm here for you. And that is like, she wasn't ready to hear it and maybe not even able to hear it and process it. But that is probably like exactly what she needed in that moment, was that support.
It's like he knew he was about to get booted off The Bachelorette. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just
I I
like, he's
am
just like, I
unable.
love you. I'm just like, I don't.
So
You're
so
only 3 dates in, Mako.
let me slightly reframe these actions,
Thank you.
right?
Thank you, please.
Because one could read it as selfish, right? Or Mako was engaging in bystander prevention intervention, right? Where at the lowest point, when all hope is lost, to reassure Korra that the relationship she has is not rooted in the fact that she's Avatar, but because she's Korra.
And he was
And
very
I
articulate with that, too.
and I think that articulation is important because of what we talked about earlier, the fact that so much of Korra is wrapped up in being an bender, being the Avatar. And I think it's really, really important when we lose those abilities or when we cannot function in the ways that we have prided ourselves to function, to hear that even in the midst of what you would deem as a failure or an extreme loss, it does not negate how I want to show up for you and how I desire to be with you.
Mm.
If you give
That's
me
such a more
permission.
generous reading.
That does speak, and like that's a generous reading, and I think that shows the difference in the way that we like apologize or say things like "I love you," and when we say those words, and because if it's for Korra's benefit, it changes the meaning completely
Completely.
than if it is for
Absolutely.
Mako's benefit, and I think
Now,
that's where we struggle with apologies, or that's where we struggle when we use "I love yous" as like a last resort, is when it's for us and not necessarily for the people that we're apologizing to or telling that we love.
and let's be honest, how many of us are really truly graceful when someone is grieving?
Yeah. I will
It's
not. I won't
messy.
claim grace
It's
here.
messy. Like, no one wants to make anyone feel worse, and
Yes, no
those
one
things happen all the time.
yeah, no one wants to make anyone feel worse. And then if sometimes people are uncomfortable with silence, right?
So
And
true.
and the call from Katara was give her space, let her
Love
figure it
her.
out, right? And people were
Yes.
like, but like, what do I do? Like, how can I fix it? Right? Which is, I hate to say it, is very typical of how males are socialized.
Mm.
You all
Mm-hmm.
fix because
Oh,
come,
I'll own that. I am absolutely a fixer by nature.
yeah,
Like I've
where
learned that. I have honed it. I am working on it. But that is so me.
right. So it to me it read as a traditional masculine response of something is wrong, how can I fix it? Oh, I can fix it by really reminding her of my love and care for her. I can fix it by giving her the thing that she desires, right, which is my affection. even though what maybe was needed in the moment was presence, and
Yeah.
I don't understand, but I want to stand with you, even if we stand in silence.
One of the things that I'm learning about in class in divinity school right now is the power, both power and necessity of lament. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things, and I'm like all about it, but other people,
Like what the stepsister does in Cinderella.
that's not what I was thinking. But you
That's
know,
a one.
That is a Broadway deep cut joke.
that was a deep,
That's a deep. That's
cut.
for a very niche
Yeah.
That was like Rogers
part
and
of our
Hammerstein
cross section
deep
of someone
cut.
who loves Legend of Korra and also has a deep appreciation of Rogers and Hammerstein.
Yeah, me and you.
That's
like,
who that joke was for.
I had to think about it for a second. I really did.
But okay, yeah, I don't even. What was I talking about?
The
I don't know,
importance of the
Hamilton.
lament, which is
Oh, thank you.
right up my lane.
So one of the things that I'm catching on to is I've always been all about some sadness and lament. You should see my emo poetry from when I was a teenager. It's bad. Maybe that'll be a Patreon perk. I'll read one for Patreon.
My goodness.
But
Can it please be?
probably not. But yeah. Oh, Max can read
Let Max read it for
Oh,
Patreon.
no, that's so much worse. Okay. But yeah, okay. So this power of lament is really important because what we're realizing, and what I'm realizing rather in class, is that a lot of people are really struggling with this concept that lament is important. And like there are some people who are like, oh my God, totally, totally, totally. But then there are other people who are like, but. And I'm like, no, but it's important. And so it's one of those things where like I see this lament of Korra and just giving people space, as you're talking about, to feel grief, to cry, to yell at the world, to scream, and if you're religious, to scream at God and like curse God. That is like, talk about being human, right?
It's one of the best moments in Avatar is when Zuko has that
Yes,
moment on the
exactly.
mountainside
On
where he's
here.
asking to be struck by lightning, right? Like that is one of the most
You've
powerful
never held back
moments.
before.
And we say it on the show all the time. You can't numb your feelings without numbing all of your feelings.
Correct.
Right? We
You
have
can't
to be
partly numb.
We have to be experiencing fully and processing fully and learn to process those things, but we have to be able to feel grief and sorrow and not try to push that away, but it makes people feel icky and people don't want to deal with it.
People don't want to deal with
People don't want to
icky.
deal with icky, right? So
Yeah.
but there's such power in just being able to cry.
Yeah.
Right? One of the things I'm trying to get better at as a partner is this idea, and it's right. Like I am one who's like, you have a problem? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it now. Get it
I
all
want to
out.
solve it.
And it's not. But I don't even necessarily want to like fix it immediately, but I want to hear about it. Right? Like let's chat about it. And sometimes that is not a space where my partner is at, and I have to be better about it. Like, are we problem solving? Are we feeling? What like? I'm just here. And I'm just gonna be here and be present, and that needs to be enough for me sometimes. And so that's something that I need. Like that's something I'm consistently working on.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
let's
I
all
think
work on
it's
that.
yeah, I think it's important. And as a therapist, right, we're trained to sit in silence, and we're trained to sit and be with people as they are thinking through or feeling through or experiencing hardship. And that moment where, you are really faced with loss and grief, sometimes the best thing a person can do is just, do you want a snack? Do you need a blanket? Okay, I'm just going to be sitting over here. Text me if you have a need. Because the pressure to come up with words, the pressures to come up with answers, or to even give hope, right, is something that is undue.
Falls on deaf ears.
It falls on deaf ears, especially when you have been posited or when your existence is tied up into being the great big hope for this generation, right? And so part of the like sitting with and waiting of the healing scene, what makes it so hard is that I so identify with Korra because I can only imagine the pressure that she feels when walking out, trying to give an encouraging word or trying to
Yes.
show a stiff upper lip or trying to be unaffected, trying not to lose her strength on top of her abilities
Yeah.
in front of everyone and needing that space to just get away and be so that
Yeah.
I can shake it off and then come back and give you the representative. Um, and so the privilege to allow someone in that space of being raw, it's such a holy and pure place that I think we don't often take it for granted because we just
Yeah.
assume that that's what it is. But for people who have to be on or have to perform to disarm ourselves, to take off our own mask, right? Because so many unmaskings happened in that moment. Um,
Mm.
means something.
You know, what you're talking about is kind of lifting up a something. I'm in an ethics class, which I'm realizing I really love talking about ethics.
Yes.
Shocker, based off this show, right?
It's almost
Um,
like we have a whole podcast about
yeah.
it.
But one of the things I'm reading about is the concept of moral formation and how morality is formed within us, and there's we're talking about like in the development of character, and I have been working in character development ever since my 16-year-old self got a job at the Y with as a counselor, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's like that is preached to us about what we're
Mm-hmm.
doing with children every time we step through the metaphorical door of going to work, right? We are constantly focused on character development. And the Greek for character is derived from this idea of when we make an impression on something. It's from sculpting,
Mm-hmm.
right? You develop a character, and what that does is it creates an impression. And so in order to have an impression upon you, you have to be able to be impressed, which means if you are like a diamond and you can't be carved, right? It's really difficult to form. But what that also means is the more vulnerable we are, the more able we are to develop morality and also, frankly, immorality. So it is at our
Mm-hmm.
most vulnerable points that we are most prone to these major changes and developments in our character and in our morals. And what we see
Mm-hmm.
here is that Korra is at a really big fork in the road right here, where because this
Mm-hmm.
is her most vulnerable that she's ever been, right?
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, she has this ancestral wisdom that we kind of talked about on your or
Mm-hmm.
last time you were with us
Yeah.
that is able to guide her towards a moral formation that is going to help her move forward in a way that is positive, right?
Right.
Versus this other direction of immoral formation, if you will. So I find that analogy to be really helpful in terms of thinking about this. And so like again, I think the answer, like just the takeaway point there is if we are armoring up all the time, we're not going to be able to develop our character. We're not able to grow,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're not able to move forward. We're not able to be human. And so in order to become who we want to become, in order to become something greater than who we are now, we have to submit to this concept of vulnerability. And that's tragic and also really touching and really beautiful at the same time.
Right. And when we think about vulnerability, right, there's two camps, right? There's the one camp that vulnerability is a strength, Brene Brown.
That's me.
Yeah, right. And then and then there's my camp, right? Which is like vulnerability is risk, it's danger, and I
Yep.
need to protect myself, right? And I think there's a willingness to hold that both can be right in the moment,
Yeah.
right? I think one of the things that Aang always had a privilege to do that Korra did not is Aang was always the great diplomat, right? It was just like, can we talk about it first? Or
Yeah.
or do I have to throw hands? If I don't have to throw hands, I would choose not to. Like if I don't have to fight, and that's based off of conditioning, right? And then you see a warrior in Korra, right? Where it's like, I don't have the luxury of being diplomatic because when people swing, they swing for my head.
Yeah.
They're not going to stop and talk first. They're going to put me to the test and I have to be ready. And I think, when you hold that into tension and we talk about this connection, right? There's a beautiful part about how the avatar realm is the safest place for the human concerns of the avatar to be, right? Because only other avatars get how to walk that line between diplomat and throwing hands. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, you know, it was beautiful to be able to know that at that lowest moment, at that moment in which the decision had to be made, that's when her spirituality came into being.
Mm.
And because it's often when we cannot see how to connect the dots, that's when things that are beyond ourselves or our highest self come into play to connect the dots for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I just had to point that out there because I think it's
No, I
really
love it.
important.
I think that's a wonderful place to wrap up like our main section of the episode. Do we have any other big moments we
Oh.
want to talk about? Even they're all there.
No, we have at least one more. We can there are others we can skip, but we have to talk about Asami and Mr. Sato here.
Playing battle bots.
Yeah. Like this is
Talk about armoring up.
like
Woo!
Gundam Wing. Okay, yeah, we have to mention this.
He
right?
has this moment, right? Like this moment of like, there's regret on his face. We see it. We see the like, what have I become? And then we see her humanize that and be like, she's so mad, and she then sees the humanity, and then he swings on her. Like what? He is a
Listen.
terrible father, and that is
Yeah.
not my most generous language.
I mean, like it's called out by three people: you, Bolin, and Asami herself.
Right,
Like you're
like,
a horrible
that's-
father, Mr. Sato.
When it's almost like we get to this moment of you've got a chance. Do you double down or do you go for the resolution and admit
Yes.
that you're wrong? And he
Doubles
he
down.
hits that double down. He hits the whammy, right? Like he goes, "Nah, I'm doubling down." Because we see Asami tap into his shame, right? Like
Mhm.
mom would have hated you. Ugh.
Woo.
And the dagger is twisted.
Yeah.
Like, and so I think you just I don't it's we want to talk about icky moments of feeling like and
So-
dealing with grief and shame and sorrow, and that's what he did. And I think it kind of
Yeah.
goes back to your statement of like we're most impressionable or like can choose immorality or morality when we're at what we feel is our lowest point. And like was Hiroshi Sato there?
Yeah.
And he picked the side that we would argue is like not the best side.
And I think we're conditioned to choose what we have been choosing, right? It's the wolf. Which wolf do you feed? Which one is stronger? Well, the one that's stronger is going to win out in that moment when you are in that vulnerable spot, right? But I'm curious, Indira, do you have what are your thoughts around humanity in this moment with Mr. Sato?
Ooh. Okay. So
Yeah.
I just say that one, I saw it and then I like immediately was like, oh, this needs to be a whole episode by itself. Like this
It does. Yes.
10-minute, you could sit in that for like that 3 minutes really needs to be an episode by itself. But I digress. I think there's two forks that I'm like dancing between. One, talking about how grief hits different people in different ways, and also how often children advance or hold a mirror to the insufficiencies of our parents' humanities. So
Say that one more time. Help us like unpack that a
okay.
little bit.
So often when parents have children, the children tend to hold up a mirror to the cracks in their parents' humanity. And
Mm.
this is what I'd say. I've worked with teens in community mental health for over 10 years. And when we would work with children, it was never really the children that were the problem in the household. It was always the parents. And what would happen is
Yeah.
that the children's desire to be better and to grow would rub up against the the what's the word I want to use? The kind of malfunctioning of the adults in their lives,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so children desired to be empathetic, and the parents would try to like beat that out of them. Children would be more vulnerable, and the parents would constantly try to toughen them up instead of understanding that maybe the way that the children were navigating the world is because their worlds were deeply shaped by their own context and not trying to replicate sins of the past. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, that's
And
really beautiful.
so we see in this moment, right, that the fear of bending, the fear that has been cultivated, you know, in this moment, that it's not a fair fear because the daughter has grown up in a world in which bending is there is room for harmonious bending and non-bending folks to be. She sees the possibilities. She knows that the possibilities are real. She understands the dichotomy that there are people who make choices whether they're bending or not bending, and those people have choices to make, but the bending doesn't shape those choices,
Mm.
where the father cannot see it, which is why he
Yeah.
joins up forces. And so to see someone not only stand alongside, love, and invite benders into his home with him holding such prejudiced beliefs in his heart and constantly being reminded that the narrative that he's told himself is not a sufficient narrative, and being forced to make a
Mm.
decision whether or not you're going to do something different and new and scary or choose to continue your thought process because that's the only you can't stand to lose that too.
Yeah. Well, I think the sad revelation here is that again it is very human for us to do what Hiroshi Sato has done. Like he is not the
Absolutely.
only person that has made that choice, and he will not be the last. And it's a very human thing to do that. So I think we have. I think the takeaway here is how do we constantly ask ourselves, how do we create and cultivate that self awareness that is just asking that question, right? Am I making this decision for the right reasons? Am I holding on to something that I necessarily should be? Like, I think that constant um, analysis and questioning and curiosity helps us live into the humanity that we want to live into in a way. If does that make
Does it
sense?
almost center around like
Yeah.
normalizing being wrong and admitting mistakes and failing and this idea around
Humility, right?
it is, but normalizing that. I was having a conversation with someone today as we were talking about the way that we wanted to lead in the youth programs that we're working in, and part of that conversation was I made a mistake today. I didn't want to let the kids see that, and I said sure, and also can we let the kids see that?
Yeah.
Can we admit and say, "Hey, I planned out this game and I made a mistake and I didn't plan it as well as I thought I did." And let's talk about like that doesn't mean I'm not a bad counselor or that I'm a bad person. It just means that I made a mistake and we can move forward. And how do we normalize that process of admitting that we're wrong or changing our mind and allowing that to be a thing? Um, and I wonder what the effect of that would be. I guess that's teaching humility, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Or just normalizing process over product. I
Hmm.
think if we stop focusing on what we produce and the product of the thing and focus on the process of making the thing, we find that there's more grace and humility because trial and error is required in order for a product to be perfected. That was a lot of P's. And
Let's be.
so
Go ahead.
so in
Go,
other
no, go.
words, we really have to learn how to allow permission and show the journey of a thing versus the product that was produced from that journey. And I know even when I grew up in a church context, we would often see ministers and pastors, and they would perform this holy and perfect life, and they never talked about the trials and errors that it took for them to get to their place. And so it always created this undue pressure that I had to be perfect in order to do this work. And it was only until I stepped behind the curtain and saw how the sausage was made through seminary that I realized that it's a whole bunch of imperfect people, right? Who are making
Yeah, it
things
is.
up as they go along.
Yeah, it is.
Informed by books, but no one really has it fleshed out. And it's a whole bunch of mess behind the magic that is ministry. And I think allowing that gift is something that I think everyone could benefit from, but especially if we think about this episode, that's really at the heart of it, is that there's a journey of becoming that we don't always privilege over the product or the production of what we're supposed to be.
Oh, this has been such a good. I want to keep going,
And
but
now
we
let's
can't.
talk about capitalism
Yeah.
when it comes to
And-
regarding the
and-
product and not-
patriarchy and all the other things. Let's just dive it. Okay. Anyway,
Yes.
We need to be more focused on getting it right rather than being right.
Bingo.
Like we gotta. And
Yes.
it's just I left a church growing up when I was at an age where I could make that decision because I was speaking to a pastor about a decision that was made or something that was said, and this idea where it was just kind of like, can we admit that like maybe that wasn't the best? And it was a nope, I'm right. And you're just like, okay,
bye.
this isn't working for me.
And on that note, yeah.
So, but yeah, we feel that. Let's work to get the process right, to treat people well, to be doing that, and let that be the focus.
Yeah, which leads us to our next session, right? We like our next section, segment of the podcast, all this, whatever it is.
A session, a segment, a moment.
Yeah,
Time is fleeting.
We're setting goals because we know we're not perfect and we want to grow and we want to set intentions to help us do that. But before we do
Absolutely.
that, we're going to take just a brief musical interlude to get our thoughts in order for this next segment. And
Maybe in post, this is where Max can read one of your poems.
yeah, that's a great idea.
We'll cut to that.
No.
If I can convince Ben
I'm
by
already,
the time this
I'm
airs,
already out of this. This is like
you are about to hear Max read a poem. And we'll be right back.
okay. All right, everyone. Welcome back from that nice little musical interlude. I hope you got to, ponder what your goal would be. I know that that's what we did. But anyway, what we're talking about is we have the element of air this week, and we are combining that with our lens, humanity, to set an intention or goal for us to, develop and continue to grow, because that's what this podcast is all about. We want to become, and we want to grow into, have that moral formation, if you will. And that's what this podcast is all about, and that's what this segment is all about. And so I'm going to throw it to y'all and say, with the element air and with the lens humility, what is a goal or an intention that you want to set? Sunshine, you want to go first?
Sure. Humanity.
What did I say?
Humility.
Nope, it's humanity. I lied.
But those are
we
tied
talked about
together.
humility
Those
a
are
lot.
tied
It's
together.
humanity,
Yep.
though.
I think for me, it's interesting when you're doing things like podcasting, and I did even radio in college. The concept of dead air, right? Like you
Ooh.
having to fill that space, having to talk, having to make sure that it's not silent for a period of time, and that found its way into my personal life as well. And so I think for me, my intention is holding space for there to be space, for there to be
White space.
white space, for there to be silence and sitting in that, especially when it comes to being present for someone who's struggling or moments of grief, but just allowing there to be a moment of silence and sitting in it. And being better about doing that rather than trying to fill that space consistently or trying to fix things or so that's my intention this week is how am I creating space for space.
Mm,
I think that's beautiful.
yeah,
That's
I
super
like
cool.
that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Indira, what about you?
So this month is kind of being kicked up for me as far as a busy month. I've had pretty much 2.5 months to just not be anything. And so as I am kind of stepping more into the duties of my work, I want to have space and room to remind myself that I'm more than what I do. So my intention is sitting in to the other ways that I am other than my professions and my performance and my roles that I sit in. Um, Getting to know and courting and loving on Indira Udofia, full stop, not therapist, not minister, but just who I am.
Mm, mm, mm. Y'all are great. I think we should just skip me because y'all are the best. We can skip me. Um, great. So on to the next segment.
Do you have an intention I mean we can and I
No.
think that but
I mean,
here's the thing with that though because like we have to allow for that sometimes we do need to not necessarily have like an intention for the week, right? Like are there
mhm.
weeks where we can just be? It doesn't mean we can't focus on things. It doesn't mean but like I don't feel like we always necessarily have to set that intention. Am I off? Am I off on that?
No, I think that's
No,
no,
I
that's
think there's
super
an
great.
intention in not being intentional sometimes and going with the flow and
Yeah,
being breezy.
the airflow, if you will.
So you
Yes.
don't have to set
Yeah.
one if you don't want to this week, Ben.
Well, if I had said that, that would have been really cool. But since I didn't say it, I feel.
You can
um,
borrow it. It's
yeah,
our little secret.
Yeah.
I'm gonna borrow that another time when I'm gonna conveniently come back to it in like season 7. So here we are. So I've found over the past week, similar to you, because of for me it was a break from school. Right? Is this
Hmm.
coming back to school? All of a sudden, I am immediately thrown into anxiety and feeling tense, and I store my tension in my shoulders and in my stomach, and I find that I literally get an upset stomach when I become anxious, and
Hmm.
I forget to eat. Like I haven't eaten lunch like 3 days this week, and it's one of those
Mm.
things where I just get so hyper focused that in a similar way to what you were talking, Sunshine, I forget to hold space for me because there's such a high priority on getting everything done because I like to get everything off my list. But you just
Hmm.
can't do it all in like even like 5 days, much less ever like just it's so hard. It's a never-ending thing. And so for me it's giving myself the capacity to take a break and take a breather, if you will, from the rigor of the day. And
Hmm.
again, if I'm not able to get all the reading done from my class, that doesn't mean that I'm not intelligent. It doesn't mean that I'm not worthy of being in this institution. It's not indicative of my worthiness. It is me giving myself the mental breath of being able to continue on, right? And I think that's what I'm giving myself permission to do is to not work so hard.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's a similar
Remind
deal
me.
to like not setting an intention, but like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Remind me to tell you off recording what you need to do about that. But I will say
Ooh,
this: don't
I'm
allow no
so,
one,
I will do that.
don't allow no one to make you rocky on the fact that you need to be a living, breathing human being.
Yeah,
There is no
yeah.
work if you're not. You can't do the work if you're not here.
Mm,
For sure.
there's the quote.
There it is.
That's the takeaway point right there, y'all.
You're welcome.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Mic drop. But don't drop the mic yet because we have one more segment.
These
We
are
have
expensive mics. You
yeah.
shouldn't drop
Don't
them
drop
then.
that. So okay, we have
Gratitude.
gratitude.
Yeah.
It's the best.
The final gratitude of the season.
There's a reason we save the best for last, right? Gratitude.
Yeah.
It's the last one of the season.
The season's done after this.
Oh wow.
I think
Oh.
we'll be back for season 2.
Book
I
2,
think so.
season 5.
Book 2, season 5.
Yeah. Anyway.
Everyone's favorite season of Avatar-related media.
Oh, that's gonna be a hoot when we get into that. But okay, gratitude. Sunshine. Who are
Sure.
you grateful for and why? Tell us.
I trash talked Mako a little bit earlier.
You did.
This episode.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna also
You taking
say
it back?
no. It was still a very Bachelorette style moment for me. I've been watching a lot of The Bachelor recently, so I'm very much in it.
Mm.
He does so much throughout this episode that I would argue is above the Call of Duty.
ABCD, above and beyond the Call of
Like
Duty.
he puts his physical, like his actual life on the line several times, which is not like that's not a call to that people have to do that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But he does for Korra, and he shows up again and again, and he's present, and he's there, and he doesn't have to go with her to the polls to be with her when she's being healed, but he's there, and I have all the gratitude in the world for that. I think I enjoy when people are there for me in a similar way. Not that people have like put themselves in front of a bloodbending, uh, head of an organization like that, but for me it's just the way he shows up over and over again. I'm just very grateful for him for that. So that's mine.
I think that's wonderful. Indira, who are you grateful for?
I am grateful today for Katara because elders. Um, I appreciate a elder who just knows what to say to people, how to dispatch people, and allow people the room and the grace to be. Um, Katara reminds me a lot of my grandmother, who is the light of my world. And one of the things is that whenever something is, I feel like, is the end of my rope, just being around her reminds me that there's plenty of rope left, right? And so just being able to carve out the space and to tell the room what they need to do was so important and so beautiful. And that connection of, I've seen and witnessed so many losses and I can bear witness to yours. I just think it's beautiful. And I love her. And yeah, all the things.
Yeah, I love her too. Oh, so good. Okay. I am grateful for it was kind of hard to choose. There's a lot to be grateful for in this episode. It's just like this whole episode is kind of like a full season of television. But I think I'm gonna choose Lynn for a similar reason to why Sunshine, why you chose Mako, but also very different. But like Lynn had like there was no need for Lynn to come down to the South Pole to support Korra, right? And she's sitting here in this waiting room, and she is like this very gruff personality at the beginning of the season. She like was super not about Korra. Like, I don't want you here, get out. Like, I'm gonna put you in jail. And now she's sitting here in this waiting room, like hoping and like I am like hoping and praying and wanting, like feeling compassion for Korra in a way that you probably never would have expected after watching episode 1. And just the development and the arc of her being able to sit in this room is really beautiful, and I think it reveals a lot about her as a character. And I think that I'm grateful for her being willing to be vulnerable in this space and be intimate in a way that she's not really prone to do elsewhere in the series. So I'm thankful. I'm grateful for her.
Yeah. And let's be honest, she was navigating her own loss whilst bearing witness to Korra's.
Yes.
Because she could have been sitting in her own place with her own pity. So, yeah. That was a good one.
Oh, thanks.
What a season.
What a season. Y'all, we finished
so good.
season 1 of Korra, book 1 of Korra.
We did it.
Oh.
Thanks to Ben. Thanks to Max.
Yeah.
Thanks to all of our wonderful guests, including Indhira. Indhira, thank you so much for blessing us with being here today and coming back. As always, you always have a spot on our show if you ever want one. You just get a run of the mill of the episodes. That
I
you
want that
pick.
episode.
Yeah, you pick whatever you want in season 2, 3, and 4. We'll chat about it. Absolutely.
I just thank you for allowing me to share and nerd out with you and ramble, because I don't get to talk about it often. So thank you so much for inviting me, and just the hospitality that you always extend every time I come.
And where can all the people find you?
If you
want them to.
Yes. So you can find me if you are looking for me professionally. You can find me on www.iamudofia.com. Yes, I finally was an adult and got a website. And you can also find me on Twitter and Facebook if you just want to be pals and see me randomly musing in between my breaks from reading.
So one day I'll be an adult, and I'll know that I'm an adult when I have a website. That's the marker?
No, it's not the marker, but it was the marker for me because it was the marker for me because I had been told for 10 years to get one. So
Gotcha. Well, remember, everybody, you can find us also at BNB_pod on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Patreon, and because that's a great place to support us.
You get all the bonus content.
There's bonus content there. You get to help choose lenses for episodes. You get all kinds of cool stuff. Live episodes sometimes. It's really neat.
No, it's a thing.
Yeah.
People do it.
Yeah. People do.
Some people do it.
Yeah,
some people
do it.
That's right. Well, awesome. Yeah, support us in all the places, and we're excited to be back for season 2 here in a little bit. So, I'm not sure if that'll be next week or if that will be a month down the road, but we're excited to get to it. And to wrap up the season, I am Sunshine Mayfield.
And this has been Pruitt.
And this has been Bending, Not Breaking. Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.